Hello and a very big welcome to Festival of the Child, a global online summit empowering parents and educators to help children thrive. I'm just thrilled to welcome you here. Whether you're joining us here on the live broadcast or listening in on the replays, the fact that you're here tells me that you care passionately about your children. Over the course of these 7 days, we will be listening to transformative conversations with teachers, educators, psychologists, storytellers, and many more wonderful human beings, each deeply committed to exploring how can we raise the next generation in order for them to truly thrive. My name is Priya Matani. I'm the creator and producer of Festival of the Child and your host for this series. Our mission is to empower you as you support your child to grow up to be happy, healthy, confident young people full of hope for the future. Welcome to our community of empowered parents where your voice matters. I'm so grateful that you're here because it is only by coming together that we get to reimagine what raising children in the 21st century looks like. Today, it gives me an absolute pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker, Dr. Pam Jarvis. Pam, a very big welcome to you.
Hello, Priya.
Hi there. So glad that you can be with us today. I know we've got a brilliant topic and we're going to be discussing neurons and narratives, how brain research can help us to understand how to work with children better.
Yes.
So before we begin, I just wanted to share a little bit more about you for those of our listeners who haven't yet met you. So Dr. Pam Jarvis is a chartered psychologist and a historian. Her key research focus is the well-being of children, young people and their families, and the development of social policy to support this. She's one of the editors of Perspectives on Play, which was published in the third edition in December 2018, and has numerous other publications, including Early Years Pioneers in Context. Her PhD research focused upon play-based learning in 4 to 6-year-olds. She is currently the Reader in Childhood, Youth and Education at Leeds Trinity University. And later on, if you'd like to connect with her, she tweets at Twitter handle at Dr._Pam_Jarvis. Pam, it's wonderful to have you here. You have so much experience to share with us. I'm thrilled to welcome you. I'm just, interested to know a bit more about your work as a psychologist. I know that you're a senior contributor to many academic papers on the importance of play in the young child. I was just wondering if you could share with our listeners a little bit about how the brain develops in the young child. What's really going on the inside?
Nice to be with you, Priya. Well, I've got nearly 30 years experience actually in researching young children. I'm a mum of 3 and a grandma of 3. I did my degree when my own children were small. And then went up various postgraduate research to PhD. And I think being a mother of small children when I started as a psychology student on the general psychology course, but that was where my interest took me. And I've been researching small children really ever since, and how they think, how they communicate, how they develop their language, and also how that language develops into telling stories and making sense and interacting and conversation. So my PhD actually looked at children playing in a school playground. I started when they were in nursery and I finished when they were in the first term of year 1. So it was their entire reception year and 1 year either side. And I looked at how they scripted their free play in the playground. So a lot of it was rough and tumble, some sort of make-believe play, that kind of thing. And they kind of got used to me being there as a presence, and they, just played without really noticing what I was doing. And from that, I looked at the narratives that they associated with rough and tumble and pre-play. If I give you the background, rough and tumble play in animals has been studied for many years. But before I did this piece of research, a lot of the research that had been done on rough and tumble was very much looking at how children were similar to other, definitely apes and other mammals. And the point that I was more interested in was human beings are special because they narrate what they do, they reflect on what they do, they introspect on what they do. So I asked the question, well, okay, fair enough, we know that these actions are quite similar to the way other animals play, but how do children, human children, make sense of this play, and how do they generate, because these are very young children. I think this is the fascinating point. A 4-year-old has only spent 48 months on this earth.
Wow, yes.
Yeah, by the time they are coming up to the 4th birthday, they are coming up with some quite sophisticated, sometimes, narratives about why they're running, who they're chasing, why they're chasing them, and what the resolution should be, the type of bad guy play that small boys in particular do. If you actually unpick the narrative that runs underneath that, it's actually quite complex. Justice, mediation, who's the bad guy, why they're the bad guy, what you should do when you catch them. Girls will often create more what you might term caring narratives, so they're sometimes more inclined to go into, well, why is he a bad guy? And we're talking about really, really young children having these kinds of discussions. So that was what my PhD was about.
Amazing. I mean,
and
amazing.
I finished in 2004. Finished really at the end of 2003 with the practical research, so that's been quite a while. And quite recently I've updated it by looking at how children learn to tell stories. This was sort of advances in evolutionary psychology in general, which has got very interested in how human civilizations tell stories. Things like the Odyssey. One of the fascinating connections is you can connect all the way back to Odysseus in the Greek myth, and then you can connect him all the way through to Luke Skywalker. They're both doing the same thing. They're going on a journey. Odysseus just sails the oceans in a wooden ship, in fact the Aegean, which is quite a small sea as we know it now. And Luke Skywalker, sails the stars in his X-Wing fighter. But the actual underpinning narrative of the story is quite similar. And it's how children learn to actually engage in that kind of storying that's the topic of my most recent article. And that's available freely online. And I also did a sort of smaller version of it for the TES, the British Teachers newspaper magazine. So people can have a look at, the old stuff and the more recent stuff. And, that this type of research is always ongoing. And of course, we're always looking for other people who are interested in it to do it. So anyone wants to do a PhD out there, just let me know. Or even a master's.
I'm just wondering, can you share a bit more about why play is so important from a biological or psychological perspective?
Okay, so the human mind is constructed. Now, Piaget actually created this theory. And at that time, of course, we couldn't look at the human brain at all. But what he created was a theory of schemas, which most, I think, early years practitioners and probably primary teachers will be familiar with. So the idea is that you have, say, a thought, you learn that this is that a certain type of creature is a dog, but then you will start connecting it to a cat because people have dogs and cats in their house. But then there's all sorts of other connections that go all over the way, over the place that psychologists call a spreading activation type of process, which is so there is a link between, say, cats and lions and tigers that doesn't exist between cats and dogs, and there's a link between dogs and wolves that doesn't exist between dogs and cats. So what the brain does is it learns these connections. And if you can imagine, the human brain has millions and millions of neurons that link up with what these ideas do is to create a path between the neurons. So basically, small children are really just sponges for this kind of thing. So they are watching the world, they are watching adults. I think one of the things adults actually need to know is it's not only direct into communication with children that they will be learning from, it's actually just being there. It's being in a room when adults are talking, it's, you know, being in a bus and how that works, and seeing people pay their fare and going around a supermarket, and everything is a learning experience. And as they learn, they lay down these pathways in the brain. Now, between birth and 3, the brain is actually, I always describe this to my students rather like the guy in Little Britain who goes around saying, I want that one. I don't know if everyone remembers that. The guy takes, he's special needs, and the guy takes him in the shop and he says, I want that one, and then he wants that one and that one and that one. Well, the very small child's brain rather works like that, because it can't discriminate. It's just in this wonderfully interesting world where it's laying down all these pathways. Well, this, in neuronal terms, is called blooming. Once they get sort of past the three mark into the 4, this is where they start, the brain starts saying to itself, actually, but this thing is important. This thought is important, and this thought is very linked to that thought and that thought. What that's called is the pruning stage. So some areas of the brain lay down, some areas of neuronal connections are made much stronger in that phase, but others just die back because they're not so important. The child learns to discriminate, and that goes on at quite a rate between 3 and 6. Now, we're all doing this all the time. It's not that it stops dead or whatever. We can all learn, and we can all, strengthen pathways and weaken pathways. But what we're doing in this first birth to 6 period is we're laying down the groundwork for that network. So that's why it's so important. Yeah, it's blooming your connections, and then actually it's a bit like, I guess if you've got a huge delivery of books, here's another analogy, you might throw them into the room that you're going to keep them in boxes, but then you've got to spend time shelving them, what goes with what. You've got various choices. You could put them in subject areas, you could put them in alphabetical order of author, and often libraries will have a cross system. Well, that's what the networking is about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking, for parents of young children who might be listening, what are the kind of things that they should bear in mind? And what do you think children really need? I know you started speaking about, just being around adults, talking and seeing what their activities are, whether it's buying tickets on a bus or, being in the home. But what sort of things do you think that children need?
If children want to talk to you directly, they need attention. You see, so many times nowadays you see young mothers with phones and the baby's trying to make eye contact and they're avoiding it and they're on the phone, and you can see they're probably talking to work and they're busy and they're, stressed, and the child's sort of wanting to make eye contact and say something. I mean, to an adult, some small children's communications can be a bit dull, I suppose, what's that there, that type of thing, but they do need that kind of interaction. Where they have these, one of my grandsons is very much in this phase at the moment. He tells jokes, and sometimes they're not funny. If you know what I mean. Yeah. And but if you listen to him to the end, because he makes up the punchline as he goes, he hasn't quite got that yet, but sometimes it is actually funny, just the way he's approached it. And you also get an insight into his thinking about, so he thinks that goes with that, and then that can open a conversation. And I think possibly I'm a bit of a typical granny in that way, in that I've probably got more time to, when I'm with them, I think I've probably got a bit more time to chat like that, and say, oh, really, why do you think that? But that's really useful for small children. And I mean, I've been a parent, I'm aware of how busy parents are. And I think this is a role that grandparents can often fulfill, and maybe we don't use them, or even great grandparents. 2 of my grandsons have got a great granny that they talk to for hours, and she's quite, she's nearly 90 and she's quite disabled, but she loves chatting with them. So I think that we could utilise our families and our communities. with small children, we could make it a much richer experience for them. And of course there are things that you are going to teach a child directly, sometimes by example, things like holding a pen. I mean, they are going to start by just holding a crayon in their fist and colouring, but eventually they'll get the pincer grip, and that can be demonstrated to them. As they get older, they will need to be directly taught to read and to write. But an awful lot of small children's learning is done organically, really, just sort of pottering around the world, in the garden. I was lucky, I've got 3 children with 2 years between them, and if you're wondering how did that happen, the younger 2 are twins.
Wow.
So they learned a lot, from one another. So I think, things like play groups and parent and toddler, those kind of groups are very, very important. So children learn to sort of potter around together and chat. And I think sometimes with small children, the world is too uptight that they've got to learn this quick. And there's absolutely no reason for it. The human brain isn't mature until it's in its mid-20s, believe it or not. So there is absolutely there is no advantage to teaching 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds to read. If they want to, and if that's that's the way that they are, because children are different. If they're asking for this and they want to do it, then that's absolutely fine. But forcing 4-year-olds to read, if you said this in Scandinavia, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. Children there don't go to school until they're 7. So it's I think possibly if I was to give one word, I suppose, to parents of children under 5 or even under 7, it's relax. Yeah, they just give them time to talk to you, give them time to talk to other people, give them time to ask and answer their questions, and just give them a really rich environment so they can potter around in it and look at things and talk about things and just learn about the world. And if we went back to sort of antiquity and looked at how human children have largely been raised, that's the way it was. When you were 7, the traditional way in a lot of cultures is that at 7 you're seen as old enough to take a bit more responsibility, maybe to be apprenticed to something, maybe to help around the house. But up to that point of 7, it's mainly storytelling and free play with other children in the family, brothers, sisters, cousins, that kind of thing. And that's how small children learn. I think we're terribly uptight at the moment that we have to teach them everything directly, and actually we don't. There are some skills for modern life that we do need to teach them directly, to read, to write, to count, to the conventions of adding and taking away and that kind of thing. But a lot of things we can leave to do naturally.
I think there's also, if you look at the government, there's a sort of obsessive focus on testing children at increasingly younger ages. So probably some of, that's possibly where some of the pressure comes from.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, what are some of the impacts of this on young children?
Well, the problem is we don't really know, because this is the first generation that this has happened to.
Right.
As somebody who's been in this field a sort of fair time, one of the ironies I find is that when I first started out, I used to, early years didn't really register on anyone's radar. My own children went to a play school in a church hall that was, don't they call them pop-ups now? That they set up and then took down. It was run by 2 nursery nurses. Absolutely fabulous play school where they had unlimited free flow play. They had little songs and stories and this type of thing. They were fab educators. But nobody was kind of really interested in it in the government. There was no free early years education for my children in our district, and we weren't that unusual, not until they were old enough to go to school. And the first year at school was principally play-based learning when they started school. But as I say, I don't think there was an awful lot of interest from the DFE, or because they've gone through several identities. I'm not sure that they were calling themselves at that point. But really, their interest was in children from the point that they were 5. And as soon as the interest in children this age came in, as soon as we got some more understanding about how important their development is at this stage, so they tried to control it. And to me, this is an irony that governments won't fund what they can't control. It's like the devil's bargain. We will fund it, but we want to control it. And then for small children, if you control it, then really you're losing it. So to me, educating a small child, it's like holding a pile of sand in your hand very gently. If you then squeeze it, it's going to run out between your fingers. There's too much squeezing at the moment.
So how can we ensure that play, which seems so vital to the healthy development of the young child, is given an appropriate space in our school settings?
I think we could take, I know that the reference to Finland is quite common, but I think we could take some lessons from how, not just Finland, but the Nordic countries in general. I wouldn't just say educate, I would say construct their young children, what they see as appropriate for them, how they think that their lives will unfold. I come back to this relaxed thing. Think, school for everyone, universal schooling is only about 150 years old. So how did children learn before? Obviously collective schooling has brought many advances, but it's this term that early years people hear so much around, but it is true, too much too soon. We need to see the human being as an organism that develops over a very long period of time. And I've often said in my writing that if we created environments as inappropriate for young animals as we do for children, then we'd have all sorts of animal rights bodies involved. But because they're children, we look, we wouldn't. I think Robert Owen, the early 19th century educator, said this, that basically he said you don't make a juvenile creature do an adult creature's work. You don't saddle a foal and expect it to carry a person for miles. And he compared this to how he worked with the children in his village. Now, there's lots of stuff I could say about Robert Owen, but one thing he did get right was this idea of development of young children being quite different to older children, and teenagers being different to adults. This was something that society recognised. Shakespeare, for example, says in A Winter's Tale, he talking about youth, he says, I wish that there was no age between I think it's between 14 and 20, I can't remember the exact or that youth would sleep out the rest, because basically they're just a nuisance in that period of time. So he's joking about this, but what we can see is that this childishness has been recognised in the past, but now we've just got no time for it. And that's the sort of thing I think this is why I rather like being the psychological historian, because I think you can go from one to the other and say, well, look, ancient societies recognise this. We can see it in the brain. When we can actually look at a living brain. We can see it in the theories of people like Piaget and Maria Montessori. So what's the deal? Why do we not listen? And I always come back, whether this is unfair or not, to what I think of as expediency, which is the quicker you shove whatever it is you need to shove in children's heads, then and the bigger the group, and if you stand a teacher at the front of the class and they just dictate or whatever, transmit, that's the cheapest way to do it, isn't it? To run a play-based learning regime for children, in the first couple of years of what would now be reception year 1, is going to cost you a lot more. You need more space and you need more adults. But my answer to that is, well, tough. Don't you want it? It's paying forward, really, because you're going to get people who don't have as many mental health problems, and who also probably will do better academically because the groundwork's been done.
So what might you say to parents who, might experience more testing of their young child in schools or settings that are a little bit more prescriptive and less free play based? What could we do about it?
There is, in England, the actual law says that you must send your child to school the term after their 5th birthday. So effectively, if parents did that, then the idea of the government to test children in their first 6 weeks of reception will fall apart. Because children who are 4 in the August won't go to school until the next year. Now, if that's only 1 or 2 parents doing this in a cohort, then they are effectively, I think, bullied into sending the child because they're told things like, oh, well, they'll miss their reception year, they'll have to go straight into year 1. Schools will use all these strategies. If every summer birthday parent said, no, I'm sorry, they're not coming to school until next September, there would be nothing the school could really do. And the children who are 5 in the Christmas term, they actually don't have to go to school until after January. Now, in Scandinavian countries, or I think some, not all, there is a tradition of admitting children on their 7th birthday. And I read a conversation between, an English British teacher and Scandinavian, and the British teacher said, well, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with children just coming in like one by one? And the Scandinavian teacher said, I couldn't cope with them all coming in together. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah.
And it's really down to the free nature of the Scandinavian. Well, there isn't a curriculum, the Scandinavian regime for early years, and this prescriptive ticking boxes that we have in England in particular. I know Scotland, that the other British nations do have it to some extent. England is the one that's really developed it to its highest level. And it's only because we want to tick boxes on children that we're constrained in this way. And then we get all upset because we can't tick the boxes. And I don't know if you're a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, but he's very, very sharp, Douglas Adams. And one of the things that he said in the Hitchhikers, I think, was that there were a lot of people on Earth who were very worried about a lot of green pieces of paper. But that was strange because the green pieces of paper weren't worried at all. And I think it's the kind of strategy and thought that we can apply to child development, that actually that there's a lot that is natural about it, and we are so uptight about it, and we need a reboot. That's not to say don't teach them at all, but we've just gone literally into hyperdrive. We've got to tick boxes. If they don't do that, they're behind. So we need an intervention, but maybe that particular child isn't ready to do that particular thing at that particular point. But now we're going to put them on a list, and we're going to say that they're special needs. And then they start to self-identify, and the parents start to label. And, it's just pull back from that,
Yeah, it sounds like very sound advice, actually.
Chill, as my kids would have said when they were teenagers.
Yes. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to, the relationship of play as a foundation for creative thinking later on, or even well-being in general.
Well, I think we can start from the point that every utterance that a human being ever makes is unique. It uses words that you've learned from everybody else. But actually what you've said in a sentence is unique. And that's a pretty difficult thing to learn, actually, as a child. The other thing we do is we talk in symbols all the time. So therefore, I might say, oh, my apple's broken. But, what does a 3-year-old? She's got a broken apple. What does she mean? And this is the type of thing that takes a while to learn. That I might, a 7 or 8-year-old would probably start twigging. Actually, she's talking about a laptop. So I think for parents, it's a matter of this richness, because children, it is, as long as there are no developmental, difficulties that haven't been diagnosed, will learn to speak wherever you put them, and they will learn to speak the languages that those adults speak. And I don't know if you remember, there was this fashion for this really sort of atrophied brain. Picture was everywhere that a 3-year-old child who didn't get enough stimulation would have this tiny brain. Well, you'd have to absolutely isolate a child for that to happen. It's a massive kind of scare story. Children will learn to speak in the environment in which you put them. If that speech is rich, if it's bilingual, all the better, because they will then learn that bilinguality is brilliant, because they will learn that that words are not fixed to objects. So you can call this thing two or three different things. And that is actually an advantage. And of course, one of the problems we have in school at the moment is it's so focused on children reading, thinking, learning in English, that this is almost seen as a special need. Oh my God, they're learning to read 2 languages. Well, no, it's not a problem. They'll be a bit slower in doing it, but they'll be better. They'll be better off in the long run. But I think for parents, it's on the one hand appreciating the complexity of what happens as you develop and you learn language and you learn to speak and you learn to story and you learn to pun. I mean, my youngest grandson, he's not 3 till next month, and he's starting to learn a bit of humour, that you say something that you don't mean and then you smile, and so that is really in human beings. It's an incredibly sophisticated skill, and this has to be learned organically. There is no other way to learn it. So that might seem a bit daunting, but to rest assured that it will happen. I've had students come to me with these brains, this tiny brain. Well, what about children who come from really restricted homes? Well, it is true that if adults don't talk very much in a home, then children will have less language when they go to school, and there's been lots of studies on that. But believe me, they will learn to speak. You might not like some of I always say to them, you might not like some of the language they use, but they will learn it. So it's basically getting places where children can be exposed to rich language, to adults speaking in rich language, to adults speaking back to them in rich language, giving them different words for things, giving them different ideas, saying things like, well, what if we did this? What if that happened? What do you think? I mean, this is where children often, stories of magic are fascinating to them, because we can explore, whatever. If somebody was magic, or they could do anything, couldn't they? And that's no mistake that a lot of folk tales use this, that somebody is magic so they can fly, or they can, Little Mermaid can develop legs and this type of thing, because it's all magic that's involved. What that helps them helps children with is this kind of flexible thinking. So where we talk about children from deprived homes getting early education, that's a really good idea in many ways, although I would much rather that there was help actually given to the parents to maybe not be so stressed, because if you're stressed you don't, and depressed and really uptight, you often don't speak to children as much as you would if you were sort of happy with things. But it's not to sit them down in a row and actually say, here you are, learn this. It's to give them that rich environment with adults who speak in rich language, and give them, start where they are and give them experiences to develop that sort of thought and language, and questioning the creative mind. They need time to story. If an adult listens to children telling each other a story, it sounds, a lot of it sounds pretty trite, but, that's where they are, and they're enjoying that. And they're developing those skills. And not only are they developing storying skills, but they're developing negotiation skills. They're developing socialization skills. And if we develop a bunch of adults who can't negotiate, well, God help us. I'm not sure we're not actually in that position at the moment in Western society. We seem to have an issue with adults being able to meet other people halfway, and this is all learned in the playground.
I mean, just speaking of the playground, I'm just thinking, there's a lot of anxiety from some parents who are kind of fearful of children in general taking more risks and getting hurt. In schools, children are not allowed to climb trees anymore, or swing too high, or run too fast, or engage in any sort of riskier play. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, when I again started in this business, there was a term called safe risk. And this would be part of the early years and, in fact, the primary school teachers' role, which is to check that there are, a playground is an area that provides children with safe risks, that there's, room to climb, but not so high you're going to do any more than just sort of wind yourself a bit if you fall off. And, I think that's a difficult one, because I think probably if you went to times past that there were things that children did that were actually quite dangerous. But we've gone too far the other way now. It's, don't do that, you'll fall off, don't do that. Well, I always used to work with my kids. I mean, we're going back a little while now, but I do say this to my daughters sometimes. Well, what is the word? It's the Dr. Pepper. I always say, what's the worst that could happen? If he does that, what's the worst that could happen? What if it's that he breaks his leg, or he runs in front of a swing and gets his teeth smashed out? Well, then obviously, let's stop him doing that, But if it's that he just fell off and, got a bit winded, or, then fine. He'll learn about, and one of the things that you find actually is that children are surprisingly naturally aware of how far they can go. There's I didn't write it, but there's an example in Perspectives in one of the chapters where Guy takes his grandson to the park, and he goes up this kind of pyramid. He's only about 3 or 4. And he sort of takes film and sends it to his wife, and she says, get him off, he's going to kill himself. So he sort of goes to take him off, and he then sees an older girl go to a rope in the middle and slide down, and he catches his breath and thinks, oh God, he's going to jump onto that rope, and then he's going to go all the way to the ground. And apparently the child looked at the girl, sort of sized it up, and then climbed back down. And if you watch children do that, they do this quite a bit. They're actually not daft. They like you would think, well, I could do that, and I couldn't do that. But I'm not saying that children won't have accidents. They will. But again, it's a matter of just moderation, to give children places they can swing, climb, spin, and where they're not going to do anything, and also pay attention to what they're doing, have, people on outdoor duty, and sort of be confident. I think some of what goes on here is a massive lack of adult confidence, really. That adults somehow have lost their confidence in their abilities to actually make decisions about what children, give children some element of freedom. It's their fears.
Why do you think that is, actually?
I think the society that we inhabit, we are very inclined to tell people they need to do professionals to do absolutely everything. Like, people used to sing, but now people say, I can't sing, because, there are people who, we have professional singers, and they used to make their own clothes. Or who makes their own clothes now? I can't do that. I just couldn't do that, And I think industrialisation, probably, if you want to go back that far, has brought this sort of creeping specialism. And there's nothing wrong with that in some ways. But I think when it comes to childcare, we've got to have confidence that adults have looked after children. Well, here we are, for thousands of years. And we do know how to do this. We just need the confidence to do it.
It's a very good point.
When I first started, I taught a course for the Open University. I did some community education. That's how I started, called Confident Parents, Confident Children. And I've still got the book that this was taken from. And the whole ethos of this course to me was basically to give the parent the confidence to support their child in play-based learning and this kind of thing. And it seems to me, if you looked at a similar course nowadays, it would be about, we'll take the child here and pay attention to this expert, and I think parents would be a lot happier if we could with their children, if we could somehow set them free a little more. And also I think the work situation where everybody works all the time is also quite debilitating in that respect. Because I don't think we can go back to a point where women are at home. I'm not saying that at all, but I think we could manage care for under threes in better ways than we do, by maybe splitting funding between members of a family. But there are political reasons why governments don't do that, because they want the money in the economy rather than in the community. But I think these are the types of things we need to question quite heavily politically. So
I'd like to sort of move on a little bit and talk about teenagers, but I know that you've very generously prepared a PowerPoint for us, and I know some of that speaks to what's going on in the teenage brain in particular. So I was just thinking perhaps we could share the screen and you could talk us through the presentation.
So, yeah, it's about 25 years to build a neuronal adult. We earlier talked about this intensive neuronal connection program. It's most active in the early years of life, which we went through, and I haven't actually said anything specific about adolescence at the moment. And we talked about the blooming and the pruning, didn't we, where the I want one sort of comes up, and the child wants to learn everything, and then when they get to 3, 4, they start to organise these thoughts, and this is all completely subconscious, of course, in ways that emphasize the what is important and what's not so important. And you can connect this, what we can see in the physical brain now, to Piaget's schema theory. It doesn't map exactly, but the way I always look at this is Piaget's schema theory was a pretty good guess. In terms of not actually having been able to look into a living brain at any point in his life. This just gives the point by point that neurons connect at great pace in early childhood, and we get these organised clusters of thought, of ideas, thought hangers. The first 7 years learning to learn, and effectively cramming stuff in there, if the framework is absent, is absolutely pointless. And confusing. You will be able to put in, people can learn like parrots, but it's obviously it's very shallow learning. Children learn best, as I've said all the way through, when they freely operate on the real world in a language-rich environment, and they connect the words to the world. And this really is aimed more at the kind of baseline idea that if you put a small child in a room and question them, a strange adult who they've very little knowledge of, they've only met within the last 6 weeks, questions them in language, you're highly unlikely to get an indicative result in terms of what the child knows or can do. We'll leave the link people can access if they want. It shows the neurons knotting up. So here you are then, you've got a brain at birth, and you can see there's not a lot of links there. We've got the links at 6 years old, which are really fast and thick, but by the time we're 14 years old, we've actually made some links quite prevalent, and other links have sort of retreated, because at this point we've actually decided, well, this one is important, this one is not so important. If we go on to the next slide, I've got an analogy for that.
Wow, it's fascinating to sort of see that visually, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've got this exponential development in the ability to organise thought. And as the thoughts are organised, then obviously it's much easier to manage incoming. If you've already created, say, your section for sociology, shall we say, it's much easier to when you get a new sociology book coming in, saying, oh, well, it goes on that part of the shelf. And what the networks do is help people to focus their attention on something that somebody is putting in front of them without intrusion of non-relevant thoughts, because we pull to the front that set of ideas. Oh, right, so that relates to that. This is why small children can seem so random at times. I mean, there's when you know, somebody might ask how many bears are there, and the child will say, "I've got a bear at home." Yeah, but I wanted to know how many bears there are there. My bear's pink. Because they're not actually, the networks are not there for the thing to enter and then pull out the correct response. So, I mean, this is logical. The younger children are, the more difficult they find it, because the more immature these networks are, and the more susceptible their thoughts are to interference, because they're, you know, stuff's coming in from all over. So an analogy I use with my students is that what happens as these networks connect up is that you put your clothes, if you like, in the wardrobe on hangers. The reason I started using this was because, of course, 18-year-olds are well known for throwing clothes into a wardrobe when they've just finished with them, and
or on the floor.
Or on the floor. So I said, okay, I'll start with them and say, okay, how many of you just throw stuff in your wardrobe? And you've usually got about half of them going, well, yeah. And I said, okay, so, but then if you put your clothes on hangers and you put your dresses all in one place, and you put your tops in one place, and you put your trousers on one place. So if someone said to you, can I have a pair of trousers? How quickly would you find it? Oh, yeah, well, you know. And this is how thought works.
Right, yeah. It's a great analogy.
So it's a good one for teenagers. So when we're talking about these networks being made, can you see when they're first made, can you see our little path in the woods that people have made just by walking through the trees?
Yeah.
But then maybe, you know, we decide, well, actually we want a kind of permanent, proper road there. So can you see the next one with the rabbit sitting there? That one's now been just cemented over, so that will stay. Well, for a fair amount of time anyway. We can see the grass has just started to grow a bit in the middle of it, but that's a more permanent pathway. And then, of course, we've got, you know, our city streets, our one-lane traffic, where, you know, this traffic goes down here, it goes down here regularly, and, you know, that road will endure for a long time. And then, of course, we've got our multi-lane highway, which is you know, used an awful lot. And the way that networks of thought are laid down, this is an analogy to that. Effectively, for young children, they will start making these pathways through the woods, but then as they live in the world and they learn more, they will start making some concrete roads, they will start making B roads, and then eventually they will make motorways. And some of those early roads that don't actually make the cut to, you know, being further worked on will fall back. But some of those memories will be retained. I was talking to someone that I was at college with many years ago, and she said, a memory that she had, and I had completely forgotten it. But when she said it, I said, oh God, yes, you know, yeah, we did that, didn't we? So that pathway in the woods is still there, but it's much harder to find than the 4-lane motorway. The 4-lane motorway will come up directly, you know, Google Maps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, teaching and learning then. Basically, for under 7s, this is why the informal and socially embedded environment really helps them, because it's too early to be formal. The motorways aren't there. We need to explore and cement these paths over, and they organise their understanding of the world and their place within it. So what we're doing is constructing and coordinating neural connections within the brain. We're making those motorways. And what happens to the person then is that they are increasingly able to what's called disembed thought. They can actually take it and apply it to something different. Just as we have just applied this idea of roads to neuronal pathways. I couldn't do this type of lesson, say, with a 7-year-old, because why are you talking about roads? Yeah. Why did you mention roads? Well, because but that, you know, they're not going to make that connection because those thoughts are not that embedded at the moment. But and I don't know, you know, with adults watching this, if they can remember learning a subject. I mean, learning to drive is a bit like this, that you eventually learn how all the stuff goes together. But when you first start, it's, you know, can't imagine how anyone can use the, you know, the accelerator, brake and clutch, or actually coordinate that with steering or the mirrors. But as time goes on, those pathways in your brain get you know, actually linked together and cemented, and then you can do it. So we've that's what children are. They're learners, they're absolute beginners, and they need to construct the framework for the learning to take place on. And actually trying to put in stuff before you've done this is, you know, sort of sometimes useless, sometimes harmful. And what it can do is to create inflexible thinkers, because this is this. They don't have time to think around it or make their own connections. One of the things I say to my younger students who've just done A-levels, sort of 6 months, a year later, how much can you remember of, you know, what you needed to know for your A-levels? And they often say very little, because the way they've learnt it is bit by bit by bit, chunk by chunk by chunk. And they've just learnt it by heart. They've regurgitated in the exam. And of course, it doesn't really mean anything or isn't really important. So then it gets forgotten. So it's a you know, a sort of little pathway through the woods, if you like. It never joins the main framework. So this is why it's so important that children under 7 need to be in an informal learning environment where there's lots of rich language and you know, experiences going on.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the research all points in a certain direction, and yet, you know, educational policy in our schools is moving in another direction, and that's contrary to the research.
This is true, but in our schools it is. But in Singapore, in particular, it's moving the other way. But they've done with the transmission education way of doing things, because they are worried about the lack of creativity in their society. So I think for my take on this for the Western world is its expediency and parsimony. It's cheap to stand one teacher in front of 30 children and tell them things. It's more expensive to put, you know, 4 or 5 a teacher and maybe 4 assistants into a bigger area for children to sort of free flow play in. So it's, and the other thing is actually you can if you are going to really transmit and, you know, sort of beat this in, if you like, then children are probably going to appear to learn more quickly, because it's a bit like what I said to you with the A-level students. They are going to appear to learn more quickly because they're learning this off by heart for a test or whatever. And there were studies done in the US where it was shown that in the early years, when children were transmission taught various things, they did on an immediate test appear to be more forward than children who were undergoing play-based learning. But then there's something called fade out. So if you then test them again when they're 7 or 8, the children who seemed to do better in the first instance were now behind the children who were in the rich play-based learning, because it's the children in the play-based learning who created the framework and stuff was sticking.
I mean, just anecdotally, you know, if I think about my own GCSEs or A-levels, that was pretty much the sum total of my learning, cramming for exams, and I pretty much can't recall any of it now.
I hear that so many times from students, that there's so little they can recall from school. So, I mean, this is kind of the summation. What the theory tells us is that over formal teaching and learning for children under 7 can obstruct learning. And what we haven't talked about is this association of school with overwhelmed and stressed. I was talking to my middle grandson who's 6. He's a summer birthday, so he's just about to go into year 2. He was 6 not so long ago, and I said, "Are you looking forward to going back to school?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Oh dear, why?" And he said, "Well, because when you go into year 2, all you do is work. You don't have any time to play." And he said he hadn't had that much time to play in year 1, and he was kind of really dreading going back and not having any time to play in year 2. And I just think that's a terrible shame, because this is obviously setting up an association of school for him with, I don't know if he's so much, I don't think he's actually at the point of being overwhelmed and stressed. He's a very quick reader, but he I would say uninterested, bored is more the term that he was communicating. And I think this is fairly common. There's this generic inequality, which is crazy, that we bring in our system for summer birthday children, because when they come into school, they are actually 20% more developed and have 20% less experience, because of course they're 4 and the other children are 5. It's 48 months as against 60 months.
Which is tremendous at that age, isn't it?
It's huge. It's the same difference as exists between an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Wow.
But the government want to test them all at the same time. 6 weeks, I think it's within the first 6 weeks of school, and they're not really kind of interested in this. I mean, maybe this is to do with their statistical program, but to be honest, there's other issues around baseline, which is, I don't know if you know, but the parents and the teachers are not going to be given the results. They're going to be what they call black boxed, and then they come out when the children are in year 6 and they want to do a statistical study with them, that in terms of trajectory, and eventually evaluate schools in that way, as how they, draw a line in terms of how they progressed between reception and year 6. But one of the points I've made is that let's go to the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old who have the same percentage of life experience between them. If you put them into the same test, do you think the 8-year-old would get more stressed with that test than the 10-year-old? Because I think they would. And this is something that the government don't really see these children as human beings. They don't see them as, being stressed, being worried, this being a literally a strange situation for a small child. And that's not of interest to them. And the other thing, this is really research, is baseline, because it's not been done in any other country before. As research, there should be, ethically, there should be a request to parents for the children to act as participants. And the data should be shared at least with parents. I mean, with schools, that's another argument. But the government aren't going to do this. So if I wanted to do a study like this with 20 children, I'd have to put it through the ethics committee of my university. I would have to share the results with the parents. I would have to set up the situation so the children weren't upset by it. Well, the government, because they can, are not doing any of this. They are just going to apply it, and they don't seem to want to listen to the issue that children, of 4 will be more. I'm sure they'll all be stressed with it to some extent, but the 4-year-olds particularly so, because they're being asked the same questions as 5-year-olds, and then it's going to be harder for them.
It's actually shocking, really, isn't it? If you think about it.
Governments, Western governments in particular, I come to the conclusion in the end they don't really see children in some senses as proper human beings. We're currently in a discussion. This is a sort of group of early years people that I associate with Channel 4, about a programme that's due to go out tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 20th of August, which is called Train Your Child Like a Dog.
Wow.
And we've asked about the ethics of that. We've asked about the, you know, context of using children as guinea pigs without, you know, consent, etc., etc. And we're just not getting any response. So it's not just the government; it's television companies, the establishment. And I think some of the tick boxing that we talked about earlier drives this, that children are products, not human beings. And I think it's a function of the kind of socio-political environment, and I don't really know what the answer is, to be honest. What you are doing with children with quite such flexible brains is encouraging some pathways to form, you know, in preference to others. And one of the things I wonder, if you're phonics testing a child at 5 and you're you know, training towards this, do they construct the, you know, does that say, we'll construct this vision to sound pathway, while the pathways dealing with meaning making element of reading sort of take a back seat? But actually, reading's a form of communication. It's about making meaning. The phonics is the, you know, nuts and bolts of it. So I'm not anti-phonics. I've been called anti-phonics because of something I said in the TES. Not at all. I think phonics do have a place in reading testing. What I am concerned about is whether that is quite so early in life. Maybe children need to learn to enjoy books and, you know, what books do and what books contain before, you know, this very mechanical type of teaching takes place. And as we've said, with the baseline testing at 4, what the child knows, can do is depends very heavily on whether they're, you know, 48 months, 60 months, or anything in between. If they are come from English, a home with English as additional language, that will also have its effect. And a lot of the questions about things like teddy bears and what have you are really very related to white English middle class culture. So, you know, it's all rather meaningless to me in the end, you know, and it puts the child through an unpleasant experience for no real reason. And no real advice has been taken from a wide range of people with early years expertise. Practitioners, in fact, are often very, very much put in the back seat in this respect. You know, it will be 1 or 2 academics, and that will be that. This is what I just said last week in the TES, that the human mind constructs the culture within its own mechanisms. So effectively, a child lives in the culture that has to be constructed in their thoughts. And the mind is not a passive sponge, it's an active network of neurons, and it's that are constantly building new connections in response to experience. That relates to, I've said this already, to the neurobiology that is coming to light in the 21st century. It's also the types of things that people like Maria Montessori and Piaget said in the 20th century. Pestalozzi, Froebel, all of these very much were for the open type of learning, and the neurobiology has shown this to be to be correct. And what happens is you construct these concepts within an environment. So children up to the 7th year of life are absolute beginners in this, and they need to construct the framework on which this runs. And I love this Humpty Dumpty in Alice in Wonderland, because, you know, we're going back nearly 2 centuries here. And he has this conversation with Alice, who takes the role of the child. I think it's on the next slide if you go on to the next one. And he says, Humpty is playing the adult in this, and he says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. And Alice says, well, but how do you know, the what a word means? This is really confusing. And Humpty said, it's a matter of who is to be master, the person or the word. And I think our ways of educating children now rather do make the words the master, not the person. I think there's a lot of this in modern life.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and you've shared so much rich information. I'm just, just before we leave, I was just wondering if there are any 3 takeaways that you could share with parents about play.
What they need effectively is to, with small children particularly, is relax. You don't need to be directly teaching them something all the time. Actually, things like showing them what books do, reading them stories is great. You don't have to actually start teaching them to read or anything like that. What they need is immersion in an environment with lots of love, lots of interaction, lots of language with adults and with other children, and lots of attention from adults and other children, and time to play. And that's what they need at that age. As we go into the school years, I think we need to keep attention on stress and whether we're giving children enough time for creativity. Storying, which, as I say, I've just written an article about, is natural human, a human thing that we've done really since we've been human, and children need a lot of time to get into not just listening to stories but telling their own stories. We think in stories, and I think that children need a lot of time to do that. So again, this is actually slowing down education and not teaching fact after fact after fact, but allowing exploration and talk about things. And if we go to the teenagers, I think we have to remember, although they're so big and look so adult, they are still children, and the best way to respond to things like tantrums is in a calm way. With small children, it's said that if they throw themselves on the floor and start screaming, the best thing that an adult can do is try to contain their feelings rather than shout back at them. Is to say, well, I know you're not very happy about this. You can be firm in that. You don't have to give way. You can say, I know you're not happy about this, but so whatever you say, we're not going to do this, but let's have a talk about why we can't do it. And we can use those techniques on teenagers, and where you might get them going to their room and slamming the door. In my experience, as I've taught a lot of teenagers, and I've parented 3 kids through teenage, if you take that attitude to them, you usually get to the point at some point where they say, sorry, can we have a chat? Whereas if you shouted back at them, then it will go on and on. I think again, it's relax. These things happen. They're kids. They're going to make mistakes. And it's being there. It's being an adult for the child. And I think sometimes maybe we don't think about that at any age.
Thank you so much for your time. I know that we've gone a little bit over time today, but I just really want to thank you for your generous information and all the incredible work that you've been doing over these past decades. It's wonderful to speak with you. It's really great to see how it all comes together. I just want
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to point our listeners to your blog, The Psychological Historian, and we will post a link in the chat. And also there will be a link in an email which we'll send out to everybody. And also, if people want to stay in touch with you, you are on Twitter, and you tweet at Dr._Pam_Jarvis, Jarvis.
That's right.
So if you'd like to get in touch with you and have any questions, then people are welcome to do that. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to seeing how this conversation continues.
Yes, love to.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was fantastic, and another thought-provoking conversation. But what did you think? We'd love to hear from you. What's your one big takeaway from listening to this interview? Please do join us over on the Facebook group, and let's continue the conversation.